A structure in Visual Basic is akin to a record in a database. We can define different fields within a record as variables of a specific data type and put them in a structure, and that structure can have different data types within it, so they can be mixed data types. This separates it from the multi-dimensional array. So we define the structure with the keyword structure and give it a structure name, and then we get an in structure, just like we have with a loop, and inside that structure we can define our different variables. Then I can dim a variable as that structure name. And so it becomes a data type. And whereas on a multi-dimensional list, we're accessing different columns by index numbers, in a structure we can access the different columns by their variable names using dot notation. So if ABC is my structure name here, my generic structure, and my generic variable is var1, I can say abc.var1 equals something and assign that, and same with abc.var2. I can also create a list of this type of structure. And that's what we see represented here. It's sort of like a multi-dimensional array, but we have records that are referenced by the indices, and then each of the columns by the variable names. So I can create a new entity of the structure name and add it to that list. So ABC being of type structure name, I can add ABC to my list, which contains a list of those structures. And then to reference anything in those structures in that list, I can have BCA as data type equals mylist.id element IDX, wherever the index is, dot var1. I would pull up the var1 first name of the record of IDX. I can also create a variable that's an instance of mylist element IDX, and then refer to each of its variables with the dot notation directly without the indice. If the table above was of a structure called employee, I can create an instance of employee as staff and then populate that list. And then to refer anything in that list, I can have a variable also of that type of employee equals, in this case, mylist element 2. That's going to be the Emily Jones record. And so a.imp.var1 would contain Emily, and b.imp.var2 would contain Jones. And I can also reference any field of any row directly by referencing the index number and the field. So C equals mylist element 1.var2 would be Caldwell. Where structure really becomes handy is in reading data from an external file that may contain multiple records. So let's consider this text data file over here on the right-hand side that has 4 records, each with a last name, a first name, and an hourly pay rate. And I can create a structure called employee where we have 2 string variables, last name and first name, and then a double variable of pay rate. I can dim a variable called newemp as of type employee. And I can also create a list of employees, I'm going to call it staff, as new list of type employee. Now I want to be able to read in that data. I want to read this data in from the data file. I'm going to open up my data file through a stream reader using file.openText. And then I'm going to use a loop. And I use sr.peak does not equal -1, so it's going to continue reading each line until it reaches the end of the data. Fields is an array that's going to equal sr.readline. I'm going to split it on the commas. This is comma separated value text file. New emp.lastname equals fields element 0. So I'm going to get the first element from fields, element 0. And I'm going to use a trim method. I intentionally put some spaces here in the data file because you may encounter that. It's probably a good idea. If you don't know how your data is organized, is to use trim to make sure you get rid of any spaces. I do the same thing for first name, so if it's fields element 1. And then my pay rate is going to be fields element 2. Trim that, but I need to convert that to a double because pay rate is a double value. All I've done is populated my new emp variable. It's of a structure of type employee, but I need to add it to my list, which is staff, which is a list of type employee. So I can do that by simply saying staff.add, and I'm going to pass it new emp. And we loop through and read each line subsequently to that until we reach the end. That will populate my list named staff of all these different employees. Let's look at this in Visual Basic. I have a text data file that's comma separated values, so it's a .csv extension called IT registrants registrant.csv. We're going to consider this as a list of students who have registered for an IT conference that we're going to hold. And so we want to have some information about each registrant. So this comma-separated value text file has 5 fields in it. First name, last name, institution or campus, their major, whether they are a first-time attendee or not, that's a Boolean value, and their age. Not sure why we would track their age, but I just wanted to demonstrate that we could have an integer as part of our structure. So that's our text file. We're going to read that in and populate a structure. My interface is I have a track bar down here that will correlate to the different indices of the list of the structure of our registrants, and will show the name, their campus, major, whether they're first time or not, and their age as we move that track bar over. So we use the track bar simply to select an index. But I also want to have a way of registering a new person for the conference. So I have a panel over here with first name, last name, campus, major, 2 radio buttons, whether that's first time or not, and their age. And I can click Add New and add this information into my list. Let's look at the code. In the code then, I created a structure called registrant. And it has some string variables, fname, lname, campus, and major, and then a Boolean variable of first time and an integer variable of age. I have my data file listed there as a string of itregistrants.csv, and that data file is located in the same folder as my executable file, so no path is needed. And then I created a list named attendees of type registrant. When I load the form, we're going to open up our stream reader, open up that data file as text. I'm going to create an array with 6 elements called fields. Oftentimes my text files or my data files will have a header row or header text line as the first line, and I'd want to ignore that, and so I'm just going to read in the first line. My data file in this case does not have that, so I'm going to comment that out. Then I'm going to dim new registrant as registrant. I'm going to use the sr.peak does not equal -1 in a while loop to read each line at a time. So fields equals sr.readLine. I'm going to split on the comma. And then, as I showed earlier, I'm going to take each of those fields, trim them, and put those into the different variables of my registrant structure. In this case, the instance of that is called new registrant. Then I want to add that new registrant to my attendees list. I'm going to close my stream reader, and then I call a method called sortList. I want these alphabetically by last name. So I'm going to use a link structure to do that. Dim results equals from XYZ as registrant in attendees. I'm going to order by the last name, a comma space, and the first name. So if we have 2 Smiths, I want to have Candace Smith appear before Doug Smith. And we'll select XYZ. That will select all the records into the results, but have them alphabetized by last name and first name. There's a clear method in a list. I'm finding it doesn't really work. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong there, but instead what I'm going to do is in the loop, I'm going to add my registrant to my attendees list. That'll add it at the end, but I'm also going to remove the registrant at the very first beginning. So that way, as I'm sorting, I'm removing that old list and creating the new list. I want to find the maximum index of my indices range for that list. So tb index.maximum, that's my track bar at the bottom. What's going to be the maximum value of that track bar? What's going to equal attendees.count -1? Remember, start counting with 0. And then the value, I'm just going to set it back over to the far left of 0, and I'm going to show registrant 0. So as we move that track bar, it's going to show registrant whatever the index, whatever the value is of that TB index track bar. And in both those cases, show registrant 0 and show registrant TB index.value, I'm calling this method here, show registrant, and passing it IDX as an integer. All I'm doing is populating the different labels on the right-hand side with the fields of that particular instance of attendees. On the LBL first time.text, we're displaying the Boolean converted to a string. And then for LBL age, I'm also going to take the age, which is an integer, and convert it to a string. And then at the very top right-hand corner, I didn't point this out, I have a little label that shows which number which index number this particular registrant is of the total number of registrants. So I can keep track easily of how many people are attending the conference. Now, as I make changes, I have a submit new button that I'm going to handle the click event. And so if I'm going to make sure that all those fields have values. If any of them are null or neither of the radio buttons are checked, then I'm going to show a message box saying check your data, something is missing. Otherwise, we're going to create a new instance of registrant called newReg, and newreg.fname equals txt first.text, and then do the L name, the campus, the major, the first time, and the age. For the first time, I'm using a ternary, looking at the checked value of RB true, and so if it's true, then I'll put true, otherwise I'll say false. The new age, I'm going to convert that again to an integer from the string value. Then I'm going to add new reg to my attendees list. I want to sort the list again. I'm going to put this new registrant alphabetically in the list. I'm going to clear the form, and then I'm going to call a method called persist data. That persist data is how I write the data back out. So here's persist data. I'm going to open up a stream reader and use that same data file. So I'm going to overwrite the data file that was there with the new data. Create my line as a string. Now I did a little testing here with this message box. I'm just going to comment that out. Don't really need that. And then for each reg as registrant in attendees, I'm going to create my line as a interpolated string with each of those 6 different fields of reg. And for the first time in the age fields, convert those to a string. Since we're writing to a text file, everything's going to be a string. And then I'm going to call writeLine to write my line. And continue the loop till all the instances of attendees have been written to the data file, and I want to close that stream writer. Well, let's give this a try. So in the upper right-hand corner, I see that I'm looking at registrant 1 of 29. Now, I don't use 0 for the purpose here, because our users usually don't count with 0, but this is value 0. So I'm adding 1 to it as far as the index that's being shown, registrant 1 of 29. And that's Brady Anderson. As I move this track bar over, I can look at the different registrants, and you'll notice that the upper right-hand corner, the registrant number is changing as I go through the list. But you'll notice they're alphabetized. That was that little link sorting that we did. Charlene Wright is the last one. Now, these are actually alphabetized in my list because when I write this back out, and I've done some testing, the list is sorted, and so they're going to be sorted alphabetically in that data file. My original data file, that was not true. I want to add a new registrant. We'll add in Ruth Sanders. Ruth is a student at Northern Arizona University. Major is mobile app development. This is her first time, and she is 24 years old. I'm going to click Add New. Now if I go back and scroll through my list here, there's Randall Sanders and there is Ruth Sanders. So Randall comes before Ruth, even though they're both Sanders. Remember, we sorted by last name, comma, first name. And I see that she's from Northern Arizona, mobile app developer, first time attending, and age is 24. And you'll notice that now she's registered 7, but my total number has gone from 29 to 30. I've added 1 in. Let me end my project here, and I'll restart. I now have 30 registrants coming in from my data file. And if I scroll over, I should see Ruth as one of those registrants, and I do. So my data persists from session to session using the stream reader and the stream writer. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.